The opinions expressed in this program are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual or on any specific security. It is only intended to provide education about the financial industry. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your financial advisor prior to investing. Any past performance discussed during this program is no guarantee of future results. Any indices referenced for comparison are unmanaged and cannot be invested into directly. Any references to performance of securities are thought to be materially accurate and actual performance may differ. As always, please remember investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. Please seek advice from a licensed professional.
And we are back with another edition of the Daily Dots. And I'm joined, as always, by the brain trust himself, Mr. Chase Taylor. An oddly calm day. I kind of thought off some tariff. Well, the tariff news got tempered a little bit over the weekend. But, yeah, I don't, nothing too crazy. Why don't you give us the index rundown and let us know if you and I haven't actually had a chance to speak today because you're working but out of the office. But yeah, I'd love to hear your take on things.
Yep. So S&P closed up about 0.79. Q's up 0.68. Small caps 1.18. Equal weight 1.28 with Mag 7 basically flat on the day. And I'm adding a wrinkle here. So one we have never talked about, but I'm going to add in because it's become so important to us is VEU, which is the All World ex-US index. So that was up 1.04. So even though we had a 0.8 up day on the S&P, still got beat by the rest of the world. Oil was up a tiny bit. You had gold down finally after, I think it was like 6 days in a row, up down about 0.5%, but silver was up 1. Another big up day for copper. Dollar was essentially flat, but I mean, you're at 99.73, so still a pretty bad look for the dollar. And then tons of relief for fixed income, both in the front end with the 2-year down about 12, 13 basis points, and then, but also the 10. The 10 was down 10, 11 basis points. So that was nice to see after a really tough week for duration last week. As far as my thoughts, like, yeah, you're right. Like we had as it turns out, minor help on the electronics over the weekend. I mean, the news changed there from Wednesday to Sunday, but hey, relief's relief. And then even today, there was news that came out that they're looking at doing some carve outs for some like auto parts, things like that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it takes much work to kind of back this out and realize a lot of things are going to probably get carved out. You get enough angry phone calls with solid explanations of what this is going to do to your business and the economy. And, naturally, a lot of stuff's going to get carved out. So, well, I mean, if we've learned anything, you got to take this day by day, hour by hour when it comes to tariffs, because it's changing at a pretty rapid pace. So
I would say look, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. And I think many of them are fair ways to look at it. I think there's some that are unfair. But I think that now, again, you may disagree with the way that we got here, but I for the hand wringing and the people going, oh, we're about to blow up the entire world in trade. I think it's clear that we're not. I think if anybody was thinking that, that Donald Trump was like on a railway to hell and was just taking the whole thing with him, I understand why people had that fear, but I expected it to play out much like this. I think one of the things that I'm starting to wrap my head around with is that I think that the aim is to end in more normal places. He just goes about doing things in a way that is completely the opposite of what we're used to, and certainly what DC is used to. I think that there are some benefits to that. I think there are some drawbacks to that. And again, I will just say, and it really isn't me punting on this, I will just say, I think it's hard to make a determination on either side, frankly, on either side. I think that this is a book that is going to be purely defined by its last chapter, meaning whether it's good, whether it's bad, totally depends on where we end up. If we end up in a good spot and we end up with some serious, meaningful concessions out of China, which I don't know, color me skeptical. I just don't think you're ever going to get concessions out of China that are really meaningful. I think that there is a greater chance, and I'm not dogging on Trump when I say this. I think that there is a greater chance that he pulls even further off, maybe gets some concessions, but not ones that are really meaningful, and that he tries to say they are, than China actually capitulating. I really hope I'm wrong on that, because look, if somebody was to say, "How would you like this to end, Zach?" I would say I would like meaningful concessions from China in a way that allows the companies or the countries still trade together in a way that wasn't so predatory, as it relates to us, and work out right. I don't know if that's possible. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. So with pretty much all of that, I think what's getting lost with a lot of people here is that the U.S. is only 14% of Chinese exports at this point. So I think a lot of people view this as like we have them over a barrel, but 14% of your, I mean, you can survive that. Like with Europe, it's 20%. I feel like Europe has to play ball even more. But they both have plenty of leverage over us. There's plenty of like broken things in both trade relationships that can easily get fixed. I mean, this stuff isn't really rocket science.
Well,
And like we've talked about, there's so many things that like both countries need to make the changes anyways. When it comes to us and China, like they do need more consumption. We need more production. Like both are stretched too far in one direction. It's just both have all of that political inertia for a reason, right? And going back on that political inertia causes disruptions and pain and political problems and in both countries. So you could maybe argue that throwing this big of a monkey wrench into this, is the kind of the only way you can have those conversations and maybe actually get something done. But I tend to agree, and not just with China, but probably with a mix of most countries where, I mean, he's going to get some wins. Like we're the biggest country in the world. We're the most powerful country in the world. Like obviously some people are going to back down on a, a level that is helpful to us. Um, it's just a matter of how big those are. If, a big win with China would mean obviously a lot more than 10 big wins with, tiny little Southeast Asian countries or something. Like it just all remains to be seen. I think what's maybe more interesting is kind of zooming out and thinking about just the way the whole world system has now changed. Even if all this gets put back in the toothpaste tube, like just the way I think the whole world views America and the way America views the rest of the world in the last 6 months is just a little different, and it's going to stay that way moving forward. The way I think people view investing in America, the U.S. dollar, like all that stuff is just a little different than it was, and it's not going back, no matter how all the trade relationship stuff shakes out. Which I kind of find exciting. Like,
Yeah,
you open up all kinds of new possibilities as an investor, new asset classes, new countries to invest in. And we haven't been able to for forever because we were the only game in town. So to me, it's exciting.
yeah, and I think that, and I think that switch. And again, I flip back over the other side. I said I wasn't attacking Trump, but I also not overly supportive either. Trying to call balls and strikes here down the middle as it relates to the economy and markets and not get caught up in the political side of it. I think that there's a better than not chance, like you said, of getting some serious, meaningful wins. The China one to me, the whole thing is fascinating to me. But what I was going to say though, before we get into the China discussion, because I want to talk about that a little bit more, was that the rhythm in the manner in which these things were rolled out was a little chaotic, certainly way faster, harder to wrap your head around than anybody else thought. I think that's been a lot of the chaos, is people trying to figure out, exactly what's going on. If you look at this scenario from a lens of what the changes that are happening, I think, in the global system that you talked about, I think one of the biggest misunderstandings of people right now is saying, oh, Trump did this. I think a lot of these changes were going to happen regardless, Meaning, I'll reference. I hate having to do this, but I'll reference a tweet I saw this weekend that I responded to, where somebody was alluding to many of the things that you said, that we only see these types of actions going on in third world economies, right? And this person, the tweet to me was worded in kind of a way like, we're turning into one. And I responded and I said, no, I don't think that that's at all what's happening. I think that these are things that you tend to see, but I think that the reasons behind them are completely different. Meaning, the United States, like you and I have talked about ad nauseum, was not going to continue to be 70 to 80% of the world's global market cap, right? That was a scenario that was built off of very out of the ordinary circumstances, if you will, coming out of the financial crisis from 0809, right? Meaning, we were really the only economy that could afford to print, ad infinitum, because we were the world reserve currency. And I kind of felt like after COVID, when we started talking about onshoring and all this stuff, the wheels had already started turning that direction. Did this speed that process up? Yeah, I think it sped it up in a pretty serious manner. But I do think that these were changes. I think kind of the world woke up at that point and realized, wait a second, having our entire manufacturing base in one country is probably not a good idea, right? And that puts some of these wheels into motion. I think that Trump has definitely sprayed some lighter fluid on it. But then again, I'll say it to the people. I'll say it to the supporters and the detractors both. This to me is one of those stories where we'll see where the score's at the end of the game. I don't know. It's hard to handicap things that have never happened before, right? I mean, how many times have we seen the dissolution of globalization? Right? Never, right? Not on this level anyway. So it's a tough one to handicap. The one thing I wanted to ask you on the China side of it is, and this to me is just the most interesting part of this whole thing. To what extent are they willing to play ball? To what extent are they willing? And when I throw that question at you, I don't have an opinion on this one. I don't know. To me, it's a black box. I don't know what to think.
I mean, they send us $500 billion worth of goods a year. I'm sure they would like to keep that market, intact on some level. So I have no doubt they'll play some ball. But I mean, what are they gonna? But at the same time, what are they gonna buy from us? You know what I mean? Like
Energy.
in this sense, yeah, we are kind of an emerging market, because usually emerging markets are like, all right, fine, we'll do this and that, but just please buy our commodities. That's what you get from a Brazil. It's like, please buy some commodities from us. The U.S., you used to be like, here, you could buy all this super high tech stuff from us. Now we're like, just please buy our soybeans and our natural gas. So this is one kind of awkward area for me where I feel like, especially nat gas, like a lot of people are making this point, like, oh, we're going to sell a lot of nat gas because he's highlighting it, but we're going to sell the nat gas no matter what. Like,
right.
The world needs natural gas. It's not like we're just going to have to sit on it. Like, someone's going to buy it because they need it. But that's exactly where you can frame something as a giant win that in real life wasn't. So we could get China to agree to buy just tons of nat gas and soybeans and corn and stuff like that, and make it look like a big. You could window dress the trade balance with us and China in a big way, but then you would probably be just selling less to other places.
Yeah. Yeah.
So really, to me, like, if you want real concessions from them, it has to be like, show me that you are willing to consume more and produce a little less. Like, that's kind of what we need for them to balance not just bilateral trade, but global trade. Like, it's not like it's just a U.S. problem that China
right.
produces so much. Like, it's a giant problem for Europe too, especially if they stop trading with us, because then they turn their gaze to Europe and Southeast Asia and Africa, and they're like, hey, would you guys like some really cheap solar panels? Because we have a lot. And those countries are going to be like, please no. Like, we're trying to keep our industries alive at home. So, and that's already happened to a degree, where Southeast Asia has kind of pushed back with some of their own tariffs. Like, Europe has a little bit with autos, even though I think they're starting to kind of back down there, like, a little bit, especially now. At some point you realize you got beat. And I think on cars, a lot of countries are realizing, like, we got beat. Like, they're just better than us. We might as well just take them. But to me, yeah, like, going back to, like, consume more and let us sell some of the stuff that your people consume, especially services. Like, so to me, Like, look, we don't export many goods. We're not very good at it anymore, but we're a services powerhouse. Like, so is Google allowed to operate in their country? Not at all. So maybe carve out some, even if it's small and very controlled way for our services to operate in your country. Like, there's all kinds of small ways that we could get together and we could at least export more services.
Yeah, yeah, and that would be, like I said, I trying to think of anything that we can do. I again, I don't want to beat a dead horse. But the most fascinating thing about this whole thing is going to be what they're willing to come to the table with, because I have absolutely no idea. But I do think it's going to be extremely telling, and I think we're going to be able to see what their because there's a part of me, and I don't, this is where I don't understand Chinese culture enough. There's a part of me that would think that if you look at everything the CCP has said and that Z has said, there's a part of me that has to believe there are parts of it that are hyperbole on purpose, right? Like I don't think that, and if they have, they're the only government on the face of the earth that would tell us this. But I don't think that everything they have said out loud and communicated is 100% what they really believe behind closed doors, right? What that delta is, though, no, like I don't think anybody outside of those people involved in those discussions knows. I think people maybe in the administration might have a little bit better idea because I'm sure they've been talking, and I'm sure that at the very least there's been back channeled stuff. But that's just going to be fascinating for me. And I would assume that whatever deal is struck, assuming one can come to, I would think that would have a lot of reverberating effects thugh the rest of the world. You know what I mean? It kind of feels like that would be the new kind of benchmark, right? And that everything kind of filters down from there. It's a fascinating time. I mean, it's not a new Bretton Woods, but when you look at, if you were to put this in historical context, when was the last time you had this many trade agreements and trade alliances up in the air being negotiated at the same time? I mean, I nothing really comes to mind except a Bretton Woods, Marshall Plan, the redo.
Yeah, I think you have to go back to the 30s to like that Smoot-Hawley era where the U.S. decided to go super isolationist and push back on trade. I think since then it's just kind of steadily opened more and more through time. So to have this much special, especially from the big consumers, shut itself off. Yeah, you're call it 100 years. I mean, almost 100 years since anything like this has happened.
It's fourth turning type stuff.
Yeah, 100%, exactly. Long-term debt cycle, fourth turning. It all kind of fits perfectly, honestly, in these windows. But if you think about like where to start with China, well, we had an agreement with them back in Trump 1.0 with the kind of phase one trade deal. They were working on the next phases. China basically didn't come through on it, but to be fair to them, like we also had COVID hit. So like, why would they buy all that stuff? Yeah. So, but they were going to buy at least 200 billion extra in goods and services over a 4-year stretch. We were going to, in kind, suspend some tariffs and reduce some tariffs. They came to agreements on intellectual property, technology transfer, agriculture stuff, financial services. They were going to open up more, which they've actually kept doing. One of the few things they've kept doing, but they were going to come to agreements on dispute resolutions. Like there was a decent framework getting put in place. It's just COVID, blew the whole thing up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, I think on the COVID end, it's fair to both sides that they both kind of stopped caring about this trade deal. It's like everyone had more important things to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think, from what I've heard, and I don't know this at all, but I don't think the Biden administration was particularly that interested in China. From what I've heard, I understood that President Biden himself was a big fan of foreign policy, but much more interested in what was going on in Europe and Russia and things like that.
I think that's fair. Like, he kept all of the tariffs in place on China. He increased a bunch of them, put up new walls, especially on technology. I think he was focused on fighting the technology war with them to make sure they didn't get too far too fast with the most important technologies. But other than that, yeah, I don't think he was trying to do a deal with them.
Well, There was a lot
But
going on.
I don't think he could make a deal with him. Like,
No.
and as you know, Trump can, because Trump's like the OG of talking trash about China. So like, if anyone can do a deal with him, it's him, and he can tell his supporters it was good, and they're gonna be like, yeah, this is great. Like
Well,
if Biden did a deal with him, he would just be called weak on China for the rest of the time.
right. And but I mean, I do think that there are scenarios. And look, again, it will all be judged by how it turns out. But the one thing I will say, regardless of what you think of either candidate, Trump is a hard ass, and people know that. And can it be effective? Yes. The whole thing with that is you don't want to get it to a Mexican standoff position, right? Because then nobody wins. But it does work, and I'm sure that there are aspects of the CCP and Xi Jinping himself who would probably rather deal, or I don't know, that I would be surprised if Trump could not exact a better deal out of them than anybody else. But like I said, we'll have to see. Well, what about in macro world? Any interesting news that you saw come across your plate this today, or again, you and I have really had a chance to talk. We've both been so busy, but today and then over the weekend, anything else catch your
ear? Nothing huge. Like as you know, like rates in the dollar is big for me. So
Yep.
The fact that got a little bit better today. But something you were just talking about is, this was going to kind of had to almost happen anyway. It reminds me of the Obama administration towards the tail end of Obama's second term. Like that's when the U.S. security apparatus started to realize, okay, like this China thing's actually a real problem. We got to start dealing with it from a security standpoint, from a trade standpoint, all of it. And then Trump came in and, very boisterously made it clear to everyone how big of a problem it was. But it was already like you already had sort of the the kindling starting to catch fire there. And I think it's the same here. Like all this stuff had to at some point come to a head. Like the imbalances were getting too big all over the world. It was making less and less sense. So same thing. Like you could see it already. It's just, but Trump came in and made it that much more clear that it's too big to ignore. And like we talked about before, most politicians are just going to kick the can. Like that's all they're going to do. As far as macro goes, I think like the timing mismatches on this stuff is the most interesting and the most difficult, because the pain is front loaded on a lot of this, and the good that can come from it for the U.S. is on the back end, and that makes things very, very difficult. And then, as we talked about, the front running of tariffs can make data good for a little while, but then you kind of feel like you're going to get a bunch of pain. When it comes to monetary policy, this will create inflation on the front end, but then deflation on the back end. But none of us know when you go from inflation to deflation. I've seen some good data work that shows you probably don't even see like any of the impacts in hard data on this stuff until like mid to late summer.
Yeah.
So it's going to be awkward. We're going to be kind of awkwardly flying blind on data between now and then.
Is that just the natural lag in that, do you think, or is that more of a byproduct of front running tariffs?
Both. So like on inflation, like we haven't seen any of it hit yet, because if you think about it, like we have barely even had a week or two, not even, of these tariffs in place. So you're looking at, 5 days or whatever, and that's at 10% on most of them now.
You know what was interesting, and I don't know if because I don't even know if it was I don't even know if it was coordinated, if it was planned, or if it was part of the deal. But part of me sat back and went, the focus he's had on getting oil lower, it started to make some sense to me recently, because I went, oh, I kind of feel like they were using, or in their mind, conceptually, kind of having lower oil prices be almost like a stealth stimulus to sort of pad and offset any of the turbulence caused by, rate gyrations, tariff issues, things like that. It kind of, and if that's the case, I kind of thought that was a little clever, because I think that navigating this with $60 oil is probably a lot easier than navigating at 80 to 90, isn't it?
I mean, no question. And it also gives you a little bit of extra negotiating power while you try to get deals done with Iran and Russia both. So I think so. It's helpful there as well. Um,
It's funny, man. It's
but at the same
such a
at the same time,
tech-driven world. Oil still
it
matters
looks
a
like,
lot.
yeah, same time it looks like U.S. oil production is about to start rolling over. So in that way, it's interesting because that will put a bit of a floor under price. Obviously, not great for U.S. growth if U.S. production starts to pull back some. Plus, just politically, I mean, the oil industry is a massive supporter this election cycle for obvious reasons of Trump. So if all of a sudden they got to start laying rigs down, they may get a little maybe having a little less fun. But I view that as a short term thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think the Saudis are trying to subsidize us forever. So,
Right. Right.
but yeah, you think about tariff price increases if you get those at the same time. If everything at Walmart's like 10-20% more all of a sudden, like doing that to people at the same time that gas prices are flat to up, that's
Not good.
immense pain. Yeah. So
Yeah.
to be able to offset some of it, no doubt helpful.
Yeah. What do we see coming up for the rest of the week? Do we have any big data prints coming out?
I don't think there was anything huge this week. We have, let's see, retail
Tax day
sales.
tomorrow. Tax day tomorrow.
Oh, so yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because that actually does create a liquidity drag. The TGA obviously goes flying up as people write their checks to the government, and that's a bit of a liquidity drag that a lot of times does see some struggles in equities. Speaking of, though, we'll have options expiration Thursday, which will help these options dealers kind of resquare their books, not have at least at first there insane negative gamma. So that might be something that calms the market down, gets this extreme vol out. And speaking of extreme vol, you had the move index rip to essentially call it the highest it's ever been because it's just once you get past like 150, it doesn't matter anymore. So that almost has to come back down from there. So that stuff should be somewhat helpful. You've reached, I mean,
Where'd the VIX finish on the day?
Today. So front month VIX is at 25.7. So it was down 11% on the day. And yeah, move is currently in the 130s after hitting like 170 something.
I know you don't look at spot, but
so we'll do, yeah. That's got to like 45, something like that.
Oh, it's at 30.89 now. Boy, a huge drop in the VIX today. Boy,
yeah.
Again,
I would expect that to continue for the rest of the week at least.
Now, yeah, I was joking around last week how I told you that buddy was, he doesn't invest, but he texted me. I think it was on Tuesday, and it was the day after we had the big smash down. VIX went. He's like, "Hey, you think it's a good idea to buy VIX calls or no? Buy some." I think he was going to buy them so they expired on Friday. He's like, "Buy some calls on VXX." He's like, "No, we don't touch the VIX over 30." Next day, the VIX is up like 18%.
Right.
And anyway, he actually is my personal trainer. I was having a good laugh with him this morning, and I was like, "So here's how this works. Whatever I tell you, you got to do the opposite." But no, but today is why we say that to people. If you want to play the VIX, look. My attitude is, I play the VIX when it's between 15 and 20. If I'm looking for protection, if it's above that, I'm looking for other ways to hedge, right? Just because this is why you don't buy it at 35 or 40. You're gonna get 15 to 20% down days. Right.
Yeah. I mean, you buy it in the teens and you hope that you have the ability to sell it in the 20s or 30s. I mean, really, you hope you don't even have to sell it. You just take a loss. Right. But, but for the rest of the week, we have retail sales and then we have housing starts and permits, which as always is going to be very, very important. Because so far we have terrible sentiment data. Hard data is, I mean, basically fine. There's some cracks showing in it, but nothing but like huge has happened there yet.
Some of the data and some of the consumer confidence stuff to me is a bit of a head scratcher because I'm sitting there going, are consumers preemptively responding to tariff stuff? Yes. Or is this underlying weakness that's kind of there already? I at this point, I feel like it's kind of a blending of the two. But there could be.
I'll disagree there. If you draw a line on the chart where this started, it just all completely snaps on tariffs.
I know, but it's just so funny because consumers are responding to rhetoric at this point. No one's actually paying the prices.
Well, I mean, for 5 days now, we have some 10, 20, and 25% tariffs getting paid.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, a lot of this so far is outcry about what could be coming and what all that
Sure.
kind of stuff. And why I said that's interesting is it's interesting to me that that's running into some softness that was preceding it anyway. Right. And so seeing what that interplay is, I would expect though over the next 2 to 3 months that that's probably going to create a bit of opacity, meaning it's going to be kind of hard to tell what's real, what isn't, what's tariff
It's gonna
stuff.
be so hard, right?
Yeah, it's going to be hard. And again, that's why I'll go back to in times like this. That's why we kind of default to owning the kind of stuff we do, which is own the kind of stuff where if it gets hit, you're buying more.
Exactly.
You know,
one last thing I want to talk about, and I was trying to pull this out of my head this whole time. I think it's getting overlooked now, and that is the tax cuts. I think Wall Street disapproves of those on a scale people can't wrap their head around, especially the bond market and the dollar. If you think about coming into the year, we were going to have those. Obviously, as like the campaign had that in there, as we have all expected it. It's just been a debate over how much of it we're going to pay for, which is obviously still super unclear. But coupled with it was like, sure, like we might not pay for all that, but it's fine because we're going to get a ton of tariff income, and Doge is going to save $1 to $2 trillion. So now you back out and it's like, well, maybe Doge saves 200, 300 billion instead of 1 to 2 trillion. You look at the tariff income at max, it was like, okay, well, yeah, we'll probably make a good bit of money here. But now that as stuff gets delayed and carved out and everything, it's like, well, tariff income kind of comes in lower and lower almost every day. Good for the economy, but not necessarily for trying to, air quotes, fund tax cuts. So the point I'm trying to make is if you get a tax bill that does make its way through that is very, very light on funding, I think the bond market will be very upset about that, and we'll let everyone know, like, nope, we're done letting you do that, what you're doing with the budget. I think you actually do get a kind of a Liz Truss moment where the bond market pushes back significantly on fiscal largesse. Now, the reason this is big to me is I still think a lot of people in the market still think the Scott Bessent 3% deficit to GDP can happen, and I'm not even sure 6 can happen, much less 3. Maybe 6, but not 5. Now, obviously, if you do go into a recession, which Kalshi has it like 50-55%, then the deficit goes to 10-11.
well,
And then you really have an issue. And I think the market is really sleeping now. No longer on tariffs, obviously. That's on the front page of everything. But now it's starting to sleep a little bit on the tax policy that is going to make its way through in the next 2 to 7 months.
Well, yeah. The other thing is, I don't think people are, and rightfully so, because most people aren't used to facing a 7% deficit. But in my opinion, you got a little bit of a math problem going on. Meaning, guys, you got to understand something. If you're out there thinking that it is possible to trim the deficit to 3 inside of a 12-month period of time, the only way that is possible is through hard spending cuts. Okay, if you cut, now think about it. That means you cut the deficit in half. When the deficit is at 7%, cutting it in half is a 3.5% hit to GDP. 3.5% hit to GDP is what happened in 08-09. That was 3.8, right? So this is where I think the administration, in my opinion, as much for the detractors as for the supporters, needs to set expectations. Meaning, a very ambitious goal would be to have the deficit at 3% at the end of the
which to be fair to Bessent, I think is the way he framed it.
Okay. So that's very ambitious.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, like you said, you usher in a recession, and that immediately goes out the window.
And on that point, so last week, obviously, we had the nasty bond riot. I mean, the 30-year yield went up the most since '87 for 1 week. And everyone was ascribing it to, China's selling, and it's the basis trade blowing up. But last week, Trump talked about $1 trillion Pentagon budget, which obviously is bigger. Talked about, all these new subsidies for exporters and for farmers. And I don't know, what if the bond market was just looking at the fiscal side, forget, hedge funds and the Europeans and Chinese selling treasuries, like maybe all these things factored in, but just the point I'm just want to make is, like, I think people are starting to sleep a little bit on fiscal policy and the impact it might have on the bond market, and obviously if it has an impact on the bond market, on every market globally. So just something to think about.
Yep. I agree. All right, my man. Well, we will leave it there for today. And as always, we're back again tomorrow. So you guys have a wonderful evening. That's it for the Daily Dots. We'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll see you then. You're listening to Know Your Risk podcast. Download and subscribe at knowyourriskradio.com.
Investment advice cannot be given without a client service agreement. Zach Abraham is an investment advisor representative of Trek Financial, an SEC registered investment advisor. Bulwark Capital Management is a marketing name only and does not carry a separate registration.